Alright, welcome to another tutorial video that we're having for sentence construction. So this is the third part of our sentence construction connecting words lesson. So the first two parts we talked about the different categories for connecting words, but this time we're going to be putting them into three bigger or more, three major categories when it comes to conjunctions or connecting words. So we are going to learn the three categories, and I'm going to explain to you later on why we need to make a distinction between the three. So let's get started. Okay, so you can see on the screen a PDF file that I uploaded on Moodle. So you can actually download this anytime you want from Moodle. So I won't be sending this via Slack because it's right there. You can just download it. So why do we have to talk about these three different categories? As I said, writing is very technical. So it's not just important that we know the different connecting words, but we also have to know how to use them in a sentence. So in the first two parts, we just talked about them in according to categories according to their meanings, right? According to their usage. And that's very important. I intentionally did not talk about this because it's going to be really technical, and I don't want you to be overwhelmed by the technicality of it. I wanted you to focus on the meaning first before focusing on the form. So there are two things when it comes to language learning. There is the meaning and there is the form. So when we say meaning, that's right. Whatever you're thinking, that's correct. But it also includes usage. When do we use what we use? When do we use it and when not to use it? So that's meaning. So the first two parts we were focusing on that. I don't know if you noticed it, but that's what we were trying to do. So this time we are going to inject some accuracy lesson, because now that you know a little bit how to use it, well, you still have some issues with so and so that. We're going to get into that later on. I guess habit really takes time to undo, right? So we're going to get to that later on, but for now, I want you to focus on, let me just turn off the notification. I want us to focus on how do we use them in terms of grammar. So there are three major categories when it comes to grammar for the connecting words that we talked about. One is what we call coordinating conjunctions or fanboys. Okay, so what does fanboy stand for? It's don't try to find it in the dictionary because there's no such thing as fanboys. It doesn't have a meaning. It's just an acronym that stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So this is the first category. The second one is subordinating conjunctions, and this has the most number of conjunctions in English. And the third and last one is what we call transition phrases. So here they are. They also have a lot, or I don't know if there are more transition phrases than subordinating conjunctions. Yeah, probably they have equal number. But in a technical sense, we also call this conjunctive adverbs. So they are not exactly conjunctions, but they are connecting words. So conjunction is just a formal term that we use to talk about connecting words. Okay, now we call this adverbs, specifically conjunctive adverbs, and they're very different from the way we use them. Like let's take for example, however, and even though, and but. You can look at but, although, and however, and realize that they do have the same meaning. Well, not basically, not totally, because we do know that although and but are used differently, but they almost have the same meaning. Nevertheless, yeah, I'm using I'm using a transition word. Nevertheless, we can see that they are punctuated very differently. So before but, we use a comma. If, so did you notice that we use a comma here, but we don't use a comma right here? Why is that? Well, you can notice the difference. But he kept working, all right? But this one, what follows but? It's just failed, which is a verb. So you can see that if but is followed by a subject and a verb, and we call that a clause, then we need to use a comma. Otherwise, then you just don't need to use a comma. Okay? Whereas, if you look at subordinating conjunctions, and this applies to almost all of them. Almost all of them. I say almost because so that, for example, does not follow that rule. With subordinating conjunctions, you don't use a comma before it. Okay, I know you guys love to use a comma before a subordinating conjunction, and I guess I'm giving up and trying to stop you because it's just hard to not to use a comma when you see comma being used all the time with what you're reading. I can see that when you read the English Bible, you can see, for example, NIV is using a comma before because. So if you want to go that way, I don't have a problem. But I'm just telling this to you now because later on, the distinction between coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions would be very important. Understanding the difference between the two would be very important as we understand the types of sentences. So the next video that I'm going to be doing is on that. The types of sentences that we have in English. Basically, every sentence that you see in English falls under certain categories, and understanding the difference between coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions is a must. It's necessary for us to go to the next step of writing or understanding the different types of sentences. And why do we need to understand the different types of sentences in English? Because, as I said, every sentence falls under a type of sentence. And yeah, if we understand the types of sentences, then we can write sentences well. Hopefully. Cross fingers. Okay, so you can see that that's a basic difference. You don't need to use a comma, right? You don't need to use a comma before any subordinating conjunction. Okay? You only need to use a comma if you put it at the beginning of the sentence. So you can see right here, even though I couldn't understand a word, and then you use a comma. You use a comma. Why is that? You might be asking, why do we have to use a comma? Here's the thing. So I'm going to be talking about this in more details when we talk about the different types of sentences. But did you notice that we have what we call here. Let me try to highlight if I can. We have what we call here the main part of the sentence. Okay, or in a more technical sense, independent clause. So this is what we call an independent clause. Again, a clause is simply a group of words that has a subject and a verb. So you have a subject, you have a verb, voila, you have a clause. And this is an example of an independent clause. Now we also have what we call dependent clause right here, because you have a subject, you also have a verb right here, couldn't understand, but it's at the beginning of this clause is a subordinating conjunction. Therefore, it cannot stand alone. Why couldn't it stand alone? Okay, think of it this way. If I tell you, even though I couldn't understand a word, and then what are you gonna say? Like, what? What are you trying to say? Well, what do you want to say? Complete your sentence. Exactly. My sentence is not complete because a sentence has to be complete in terms of thought. Okay, so when I read your sentence and when I read something like this and it doesn't have a complete thought, we call that a fragment or an incomplete sentence, which is not a sentence at all. Okay, so this is not the main part of your sentence, and if you put it at the beginning, then it acts like an interrupter to the main part of your sentence, or sorry, to the main sentence, or to the clause. Main clause, independent clause, there are different names for it. So that's why if you put it at the beginning, you have to use a comma. The same way you have to use a comma when you use a transition phrase at the beginning of a sentence, just like this. However, comma, because this is the main sentence, the main part of your sentence, right? Sorry, not the main part of your sentence, the main sentence, or the independent clause. So this is like an interrupter, because normally a sentence should just be a subject and a verb. If you insert anything in between or before that sentence, then you have to use a comma. That's what it is. In speaking, we say it this way. We can't say, however, comma. We just raise our voice to signal that it is an interrupter. So we say, for example, however, right? Did you see my tone there? Did you hear my tone right there? However, so there's like a raise in the tone at the end of however to signal to my listeners that I am not yet over. There is something more I want to say. Okay, so that's how we use a subordinating conjunction, and I already jumped to the transition phrases. Okay, now we have a lot of subordinating conjunctions. And our goal this semester is to be able to master all of them. Not just know how to use them, but master all of them, because it's important for your fluency. Remember that our goal this semester is mainly fluency and secondarily accuracy. So use them correctly in terms of meaning and use them correctly in terms of form or grammar. All right, so there you go. Yeah, it's the same thing here. Now let's go, the same thing. So when you use transition phrases, if it's at the beginning of the sentence, then you also use a comma after it. So did you notice that when you use transition phrases, you don't use a comma before it? That is illegal. Don't ever do that, okay? So when you see something like this, don't use a comma before it. okay, you have to use a period or a semicolon. So you can use either of them. If you use a period, you have to capitalize it. If you use a semicolon, then you have to use a small letter, just like this. However, but the same thing, you use a comma after the transition phrase. Now, I want you to go about and reading these. We are going to have a separate lesson on how to use the fanboys because they are quite special, but we are going to reserve that after we're done with the types of sentences. So I want you to familiarize yourself with it, with these categories. Like, what are our subordinating conjunctions? Now, this is the part where memorization becomes important, becomes useful. Because it's necessary, as I said, for you to be able to distinguish between the two. Once you become, between the three, once you become familiar with the different, okay, this is a subordinating conjunction, so I should use it this way. I should use a comma. I should not use a comma, right? Oh, this is a transition phrase. By the way, this is not complete, huh? This is not complete. If you want a more complete one, then you can just Google it. But right now, my goal is not to give you a complete or comprehensive list. My goal is simply to introduce to you the three different categories. When you become familiar with them, then you'll be able to use them well, punctuate them well. Okay, so as we always do, there is an exercise that follows this lesson, which I will be making available in Moodle. So in that exercise, you have to, so it's connecting words part 3 exercise. So just go there and you will see a paragraph. Okay, you will see a paragraph that lacks transitions, and you will be instructed what to do. So basically, you have to insert transitions in that paragraph, and you have to choose which one to insert. You might have to insert a coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, or transition phrases. So I'm going to check if you're able to insert them correctly in terms of meaning and in terms of punctuation. So this is the part, this is the time that I'll be very strict about your punctuation, because that's what the lesson is all about, right? So I want to see an application of how you're going to be using the connecting words with the right punctuation. Okay, so that's one. And also in the same exercise, I will be giving you some sentences, and in those sentences, basically you have to use conjunctions or connecting words, and I will tell you which one to use. Okay, for this one, you have to use a subordinating conjunction. For this one, you have to use a coordinating conjunction or transition phrase, something like that. Okay? So that's going to be all for today. I want you to please master this, because you're going to have a hard time if you don't master this. And we proceed with the types of sentences. Okay, see you in the class.